Hello everyone, I'm Russ McLean, Chair of the Patient Voices Group, and today I'm in conversation with Mr. Kevin McGee, Chief Executive of East Lancashire Hospitals Trust. Hello Kevin.
Good afternoon, Russ.
It's been a while since our last meeting, and of course we've had the general election and therefore a period of purdah. The elections are over and the political landscape is, well, precarious to say the least, with no overall majority and a general feeling in the country and the county that there is no direction and that we may just be heading into another period of instability. How do you think, Kevin, that the political landscape will affect the NHS in general? And of course, at a local level, how will it affect East Lancashire Hospitals Trust?
So I am genuinely expecting business as normal. If you think about the NHS, the Secretary of State for the NHS before the election is being reinstated, Jeremy Hunt, and that gives us some security and solidity for the NHS. There won't be any changing, I don't think, in terms of the funding level, so that's, you can look at that as either good or bad. So the plans that we were embarking on before the general election about how we think about sustainability of services and money across the wider Lancashire patch through these sustainability and transformation plans and programmes, I think will be with us for some time. So we are in for a period of change in the NHS. I think there's some real opportunities for us in East Lancashire, but we need to make sure that we continue to be vigilant and do the right things and make the right decisions for the services across East Lancashire.
Whether or not we agree with it on a personal basis, Brexit is coming. The United Kingdom will leave the European Union, and no one knows how that's going to pan out, but for the health service in particular there seems to be a huge concern. We've heard just today, for instance, that there's been a massive decrease in the numbers of nursing staff from the European Union applying for jobs in the UK. Has that situation affected the Trust, and how worried are you for the future with regards to staffing from the EU?
So we are in a very competitive job market, and I think I've talked previously that we have had nursing gaps and we have had medical gaps. And I do think that will continue for the foreseeable future. We have actually had quite a bit of good news over the last few weeks in terms of some of our staffing levels. So we've been able to appoint a number of new doctors into the Trust and a number of new nurses into the Trust. And I think what's really, really important, if you're, a doctor, a nurse at the start of their careers or any discipline, you want to join an organisation that's got a good reputation, that's going to invest in you, it looks after its staff, and so we're working really hard to do the right things to keep our services, to support our staff, and to really develop our reputation as being a first-class employer. So yes, there are going to be pressures in terms of the job market. I think that will be with us for a number of years, and what we've got to do is continue to do the right things to employ the right staff and to treat them well, and hence I think we'll be okay.
No one knows prior to the negotiations how staff who are from the EU but also already living and working in the UK will be treated. For instance, whether they'll be allowed to continue to work and live here in the UK. So if there wasn't a positive agreement for those members of staff, how will the Trust be affected, and will you be confident in providing safe, effective care?
So yes, absolutely. We will always strive to deliver safe, personal and effective care. And we will do whatever we need to do in terms of staffing levels to make sure that is maintained. I mean, we employ staff from right around the globe. We've got brilliant staff from every part of the globe, and they are a part of the ELHT family. They provide brilliant services to all our communities across ELHT, and I commend them and applaud them. We will do everything within our power to support staff, not just EU staff, but all staff from wherever they come from, and we will do everything in our power to support them, to ensure that they have good careers and they are welcomed in this part of the world.
I guess it must be very worrying for them. Can you perhaps tell us about your staffing levels? Do you currently have full complements of nursing staff on the wards and in your emergency department?
So we do, but we do cover some gaps by use of what we call locum and agency staff. So quite often, if you think a scenario, it's a Friday evening, really busy, coming into a busy weekend. We might get short-term sickness and staff phoning up in short-term sickness. So we're continually juggling with those type of issues. What we do is we work with agencies to bring in short-term locums. When we know we're going to be extremely busy, we will overbook so that we have hopefully more staff on. Staffing and filling rotas is literally a daily job, and not only a daily job, you know what, it's by the hour that we monitor it and check it. We do always try and put the right staff in the right place at the right time. I can't say always that we'll have every rota completely filled, and occasionally there are gaps, but what we would do in those situations is move staff about to make sure that we staff every area safely and appropriately.
Staying with your ED for a moment, can you tell us how many emergency beds that you have in that department?
So within the ED department, we don't actually have beds. So what we would have are a number of cubicles where patients would come in. We also have chairs where patients would be treated on, and we have trolleys where patients would be treated. So if somebody came into our ED, they would be triaged, they would receive the treatment that they required, and if they then needed to stay in the hospital overnight, they would then be transferred to the appropriate ward or department where they would have the appropriate bed. So as such, we don't actually have beds within the ED department.
Have you still got patients waiting in corridors in the ED?
So one of the things that we are looking at, and one of the things that we struggled with in winter, when there was a large number of people trying to access our ED department, we only had so many cubicles. What we're applying for is a government funding to have in excess of £1 million to actually increase the capacity within our ED department. I'm hopeful that we're going to get that funding. So when patients come in, they're allocated to the appropriate cubicle. If all cubicles are full, patients will, with the appropriate staffing, and there's always staffing looking after them, be queued, waiting to the next cubicle to come up. So occasionally that will happen, and I think it happens in virtually every ED department in the country. It's just the natural flow of patients in, and sometimes you get peaks and troughs. What's important, however, is that patients are waiting to access a cubicle. They have appropriate clinical staff with them at all times, looking after them, and their clinical care is not compromised.
I'd like you to think back now to the closure of the ED. Obviously, you weren't here back then. This was at Burnley General Hospital in November 27. It seems a very small number of beds or bays in your emergency department, given the population of East Lancashire. So we're looking at a population of 540,000 people. So do you not agree that it would be beneficial to look again at the services which your trust provides from Burnley?
So I think we continually have to look at the services that we provide. I don't think anything is ever cut in stone. But what I have to say is that the actual unit or emergency or urgent care centre that we have on the Burnley site is an incredibly busy and well-run unit, and indeed the vast majority of the patients who would have accessed the old ED department on the Burnley site now access the urgent care. There's only a few, which is basically the blue light transfers from ambulance, that would come to the Blackburn site as opposed to going to the Burnley site. But to be able to access and to have the facilities to staff for a blue light to come onto the Burnley site, it would require significantly greater staff. And even if I had the money for that, which we don't, but even if we had the money, being able to find those staff and staff safely, the staff just aren't there. So I think what we've got now is yes, we've got a very, very busy department in Blackburn, but we're able to staff it appropriately. And as I said, we have bid for some additional capital funds to extend the size of the unit on the Blackburn site.
When will you know whether or not you've been successful in the funding?
I'm hoping within the next few weeks. I think it's a fairly short-term piece of work.
Well, good luck with that. We've had a number of terror attacks in the UK, and one of those, unfortunately, was very close to home in Manchester, and our thoughts, of course, are with the family, friends and loved ones of all those caught up in the attacks. Kevin, God forbid there was another attack, but wouldn't any major incident here in East Lancashire, where there were perhaps multiple casualties and victims, absolutely overwhelm your emergency department? And given the staffing problems that we've just discussed, how confident are you that the Trust could cope with a major incident?
So firstly, I would like to add my condolences to everybody caught up in both the London attacks and then the bombing in Manchester. Your heart really does go out to everybody caught up in that, and the family and the friends. But it was magnificent in both the London situation and in Manchester situation, the way the NHS and the support services, police, fire, ambulance, NHS responded. And you know what, we would respond in exactly the same way. And we did, we were on major incident standby as a consequence of what happened in Manchester. We did get some flow of patients from Manchester, and we coped incredibly well. So I have absolute confidence that, I would never want to be in that position, but if we had to have a major incident enacted in East Lancashire, not just the NHS staff, but all the emergency services would act brilliantly and would deliver what was required for our communities. I really would like to add that I think the last few weeks with the things that we've seen on a national basis in London and Manchester have really shown just how precious the NHS is to everybody, and just how proud I am to be a member of the NHS and proud of the service that they're providing on a national basis, but particularly the way that we responded within East Lancashire. We did receive some patient flow. We were on standby, and staff were magnificent. And it's I'm just so proud of what goes on.
And of course, I've said that you have had planning in the past and continue to do those exercises.
We continue to plan. We have well tried and tested processes that come into place. And as I said, as soon as we were made aware of the incident in Manchester, we went into our planning processes. Some work was managed in a different way. We created capacity, not just within the emergency department, but we also created beds within the hospital. Staff were on standby, ready to come in when appropriately. We would act, and we will act, and ensure services are safe and delivered appropriately within our patch.
The Naylor report was commissioned by the Department of Health to review the NHS estate and release £2 billion of assets for reinvestment and deliver land for 26,000 new homes. So the government is poised to agree several major deals with private firms to unlock capital funds worth £5.7 billion by selling NHS land and property. And we've had a question in for you, Kevin. Will East Lancashire Hospitals Trust be selling off land and property?
So we're not in the process or in the planning to sell off any land or property at this point. I would say, looking to the future, the public sector generally, be it the NHS, be it other public bodies, own a lot of estate. And actually, it's not our business. Our business is for the hospital is to provide safe hospital services. It's not to look after land. So as we go forward, we will continually look to maximise the use of the estate, and if we don't think we need all of the estate, I would have no hesitation about doing the right thing and selling appropriate land and facilities to reinvest in upgrading the estate and services for the population of East Lancashire. But at this point, we have no plans to sell off any land.
Over the last 12 months, the Trust has announced some quite major building programmes and investment, like plans, for instance, to tackle car parking and the new dialysis unit, to name just a couple. Can you tell us how these proposals in particular are progressing?
I think we've got some really quite exciting plans for our estate. So if you look at the Burnley site, I'm very hopeful within the next few weeks we'll be able to announce a significant multi-million pound capital investment for a new outpatients department and new ophthalmic operating facilities on that site. We're also looking about how we can develop educational facilities working with the University of Lancashire on the Burnley site. As you've already alluded to, we're looking to do things on the Blackburn site as well in terms of new car parking facilities, but also new retail opportunities as well. So I think there's a lot that we can do to develop the estate. We are in the fortunate position that we can still invest in new capital in East Lancashire, and I'm quite excited about what we can do over the next few years.
The Conservative Party in their manifesto announced plans to give the NHS £10 billion in funding for capital investment. Are you concerned now that perhaps the government won't be able to keep those promises?
So it's difficult for me to comment on that because they were national. That was a national programme, national sayings. I've no reason at all to believe why they wouldn't fund, but it's really quite difficult for me to comment on.
NHS Clinical Commissioners, so this is the body representing clinical commissioning groups, or CCGs, has said that the real value of current funding envelope is set to reduce by 330 million by 2019-20, and this is due to inflation and, of course, adjustments for population growth. What this means for patients, perhaps, is going to be longer waiting times for routine treatments and a reduction in income for trusts. The national target for elective patients to be treated within 18 weeks apparently isn't going to be met for the next 2 years. How do you feel about that? How is the ELHT going to manage that situation?
So I want to be really clear on this. ELHT does deliver the referral to treatment target of 18 weeks. It has done for many years. We did it for last year, and our forecast is that we will continue to do it for this year, and that's absolutely right. I think if you look on a national basis, I think it is correct that nationally I think the target will be missed and many organisations won't achieve it. But we have a really good relationship with our clinical commissioning groups, and we work very hard to try and ensure that all people who need treatment get seen in the appropriate timescale, i.e. within 18 weeks. I have no reason to believe that that will change. I have no reason to believe that the CCGs will reduce the funding that's required to maintain that target, and I think it's important that they don't.
2 years ago, there were plans to build a 24-hour GP unit here at the hospital. The trusts, the clinical commissioning groups and an emerging GP federation successfully applied for funding to build that unit, which has yet to materialise. Can you tell us what's happened to those plans? Has that been shelved or put on hold?
So, as I've already said, Russ, we have put a bid in for up to £1 million of new capital to improve our ED agent care and to allow GP streaming at the front door. So that's how we're looking to improve the services on the Blackburn site.
Let's talk now about hospital food and the decision by the Trust to reduce portion sizes at this restaurant. Why was that decision taken?
So I've received an awful lot of correspondence on this, and I'm aware there was some articles in the local press. What we've actually done is to increase the portion sizes for healthy food and reduce the portion sizes for not so healthy food, if I can put it that way. So what we've been trying to do, and I think it's right that we should do so as a responsible employer and serving patients and families coming into our kitchens, we should look to always provide healthy food. So as I said, for salads and for vegetables, actually the portion sizes have increased. For some carbohydrate foods, we have been careful and we are reducing the size, but we think that's appropriate, and we're working with staff and we're working with other groups to make sure the offering within our canteen is healthy but appropriate. You recently signed a memorandum of understanding between the Trust and Blackburn College. Can you tell us why that's important to the Trust and what it will mean for both organisations going forward? This is really quite important to us. So going back to the conversations we were having before us regarding difficulties with staffing, we need to be able to grow our own staff within East Lancashire. So the more staff that come from our local communities, the better, because we have a corporate social responsibility to our communities, to the youngsters who are looking for jobs in the future. So what we've done is we're working not just with Blackburn, but we've signed this particular memorandum with Blackburn to support them and to support us to look at where there's going to be workforce shortages going forward and how they can then help train those staff with us, provide the educational facilities so that we've got a ready-made pipeline of people who live within East Lancashire who can be employed in the services, be they doctors, be they nurses, be they accountants, be they porters, be they domestics, be they physiotherapy, whatever the staff groups are, that we can work with the likes of Blackburn but also with other educational institutes to provide the services and the training for local people. Well, I'd like to close our discussion today by mentioning something else that tested NHS staff completely differently,
There's been a huge cyber attack, of course, recently on the NHS, affecting the computer systems of not only your trust, but of the health service across Lancashire. We're told that no patient data was compromised. I'd like to know is that still the case, and how many computer systems have you had to replace across the trust?
So this was a magnificent effort on the part of all staff within the trust to make sure that patients and their families were not disadvantaged or didn't have any disruption to their services, in spite of the massive disruption that happened in the organisation. So just to give some context to this, on the Friday that this happened, I was actually called down to London. I was in a meeting in London, and I was getting on the train back to come up to East Lancashire, and it was about midday on the Friday, and I got a call from the office, and the office said, I think we've got a small computer issue. And by the time I'd got back up to East Lancashire, it had gone from a small local computer problem to a regional problem, to a national problem, to an international problem. That's how quickly the whole event spread. We had to replace something, and I think the last count was something like 2,500 PCs. The hard drives had to be replaced across the trust. But in spite of all that, and in spite of staff literally working 24/7 for a massive amount of time, I think, and my expectation was, and what I'm told, there was actually very little patient disruption. So although we had to go on to paper records in many instances, very few services were cancelled, very few outpatient clinics or operating procedures were cancelled, and staff coped by working harder, by working longer to make sure that patients weren't disadvantaged. And again, that was a great example of seeing both non-clinical and clinical staff in the NHS working at their very, very best, and I'm really proud of the work that we did within East Lancashire to minimise patient disruption.
Please remember that you can submit your questions to Mr McGee by email to the address at the end of this presentation, or by calling 01254 752 130, or in writing to Russ McLean, BB1 9SB. Kevin McGee, Chief Executive of East Lancashire Hospitals Trust. Thanks.
As ever, Russ, thank you.